The segment was supposed to last 4 minutes. The production assistant had told Joel Marin exactly that when she clipped the lapel mic to his flannel collar in the green room. 4 minutes. A human interest piece on skilled trades hiring. Nothing to worry about. Joel had nodded and drunk his coffee and thought about the conduit fault on Stage C that 2 of the station's own electricians had been chasing for 3 days without finding. He had spotted the likely source 40 minutes ago, walking from the parking structure. He had not said anything, because nobody had asked. He did not know that the woman who ran this building, the woman whose name was on the building, was about to walk onto that set and make a decision in front of 4 million viewers that would take her the better part of a month to understand. The segment opened. Joel sat across from the host. The lights were hot. Somewhere under the floor, the conduit fault sent a flicker through the studio's LED grid that the camera operators adjusted for without thinking. Joel noticed the flicker. He noticed which direction it moved. He said nothing and folded his hands in his lap and waited for the first question. Joel Marin's shop was called Marin Electrical, and it had operated out of a converted garage bay in the Harwick Industrial District for 9 years, without ever being glamorous or famous or anything other than exactly what it was. A 2-van operation that did industrial and commercial electrical work with tolerances that the larger outfits in the county had stopped bothering to match. Joel pulled the jobs nobody else wanted. The old buildings, the degraded infrastructure, the conduit mazes that required someone willing to trace a circuit by hand from panel to terminus instead of reaching for the sensor and calling it close enough. His toolbox had a dent in the lower right corner from a conduit bender that had slipped during a job in 2017. Inside the lid, he kept a folded copy of the load path diagram for the Northeast Grid Authority's Harwick substation tie-in. The one he had designed in 2009 as part of a $340 million infrastructure bond project. He kept it because his father had been the field electrician who pulled the wire on that job, and the diagram was the last thing the 2 of them had worked on together. Standing at the same drafting table, his father reading the tolerances aloud while Joel wrote them down. His daughter Calla was 9 and constitutionally incapable of sitting still, which was a quality Joel had stopped fighting 2 years ago and started scheduling around. She had a small brass level, his father's, worn smooth at the edges, the bubble in the vial still perfectly calibrated, that she carried everywhere in the outer pocket of her school bag. She had started carrying it when she was 6, after Joel told her that his father had used it on every job he ever ran, and that it was the tool a person used to know whether a thing was true. Calla had decided this made it necessary to carry it always. Joel had not argued. The ticking clock on Marin Electrical was a business debt note that had been called by the bank after a subcontractor dispute torpedoed a $290,000 hospital wing contract 8 months ago. The note stood at $187,000. The court-ordered asset seizure, tools, vehicles, the lease on the garage bay, was scheduled to execute in 23 days if Joel could not negotiate an extension or produce a cash flow plan that satisfied the bank's risk officer. Joel had submitted the plan. The bank's risk officer had asked for additional documentation. Joel had submitted the documentation. The bank's risk officer had asked for a meeting. Joel was aware, in the careful way of someone reading a situation he does not yet have enough information to resolve, that the meeting was not going to go the way he needed it to. The segment producer had called 3 days ago. The piece was on skilled trades recruitment. A local station wanted to film a working electrician and talk about the labor gap in industrial electrical work. Joel had agreed because it was a Tuesday in November and he had a slow week, and because Calla had asked if she could watch him on television, and the particular way she'd asked it made declining feel like the wrong answer. He had dropped Calla at school that morning. She was wearing the level in her bag. She had kissed his cheek and said, without looking up from her zipper, "Dad, what if you say something dumb on TV?" He had said that was a real possibility. She had said, "That's okay. You're usually pretty smart at the stuff that actually matters." She had gone through the school door without looking back. He drove to the station with that sentence sitting comfortably in his chest, and parked in the visitor structure and was walking toward the entrance when he saw the way the broadcast tower's ground fault indicator was reading. And he stopped, and he looked at it for about 4 seconds, and he understood where the Stage C conduit fault was. On the 14th floor of the Reese Media Group tower, Diana Reese had been on call since 6:15. She had closed a syndication deal at 7 that expanded her network's reach by 3 markets. She had terminated the distribution contract of a regional affiliate that had missed its exclusivity clause twice in 1 quarter. She had done both of these things before her coffee cooled, and neither of them had required raising her voice, and both of them had required the kind of precision that came from 9 years of running a media group that her father had built and her advisors had always told her she was lucky to have inherited, and that she had spent 9 years proving she deserved without asking anyone whether. They'd noticed. The thing her money could not fix was her mother. Elaine Reese had been diagnosed with early-onset dementia at 61 and was now, at 67, in a facility in coastal Maine that cost $19,000 a month and offered nothing Diana could quantify as better than the Tuesday mornings 2 years ago, when Elaine still knew Diana's name and would call to ask how the stations were doing. The facility was excellent. The nurses were kind. None of it reached the thing Diana could not reach, which was the specific quality of being known by the person who had known you first. That was the gap no acquisition could close. She had agreed to appear on her own morning broadcast segment, a goodwill piece, human interest. The CEO shows up and talks with a local tradesperson about skilled labor, because her communications director had put it on the calendar, and Diana's calendar was the document that governed her life. She did not anticipate anything unusual. She walked onto the set at 9:47 with the automatic confidence of someone who has been in front of cameras for a decade, and for whom studios are simply rooms. She looked at the man sitting across from the host's chair, and she cataloged him in the way she cataloged everything. Work boots, navy flannel, worn at both elbows, hands that had been doing physical work for long enough that the calluses were structural rather than fresh. She assigned a category. The category was adequate for what this segment required. The host introduced them. Joel stood and shook her hand. His grip was calibrated, present, not performative. Diana sat. She had 4 minutes, then a call with her board chair. The segment went wrong at the 2-minute mark, which was also when it went right, though Diana would not understand the second part for some time. The host asked Joel about the labor gap. Joel answered in the direct, undecorated way of someone reporting facts he has no stake in spinning. He said the gap was real, that it was structural, that the pipeline problem was a curriculum problem upstream, and that the industry kept treating entry-level pay as a lever when the actual lever was the first 3 years of mentorship. Diana was listening with the portion of her attention that this segment required when the studio lights did the thing they had been doing for 3 days. A half-second stutter. LED panel C4 dropping a register and recovering, and in the same moment Joel's eyes went to the floor. Not to the ceiling, where every technician who had looked at this problem had looked. The floor. The host paused, said something about the light. A floor director started toward the panel board. Joel said, without raising his voice or directing it at anyone in particular, "It's not the panel. You've got a conduit fault under Stage C, south side, probably at the junction where the 1980s infrastructure meets the newer run. The load is back feeding through the ground return whenever C4 draws above 40%. The floor director stopped walking. The host looked at Joel. Diana looked at Joel. The head engineer, a man named Patel, who had been chasing this fault for 72 hours, came out from behind the camera bank and said, "How did you read that from here?" Joel said, "The direction of the flicker. Ground faults propagate toward their source. C4 is the downstream terminus, which means the fault is upstream and south. You've got maybe 2 junction points that age on that axis in this building." He said it the way someone says the sky is clear. "Pull the south access panel under stage C third conduit from the left. You'll see a cracked insulator on the neutral." Patel looked at him for a long moment. He went to the access panel. He opened it. He came back out 40 seconds later with a look on his face that was not quite disbelief and not quite awe, but something between them, and he said, "Third conduit." Cracked insulator. The studio was quiet in a particular way. Diana had not moved. She was looking at Joel with her cataloging function suspended, because the categories she had assigned him no longer fit the data, and she did not yet have a replacement category, and in the half-second gap between those 2 states her mouth said, before she had decided to say it, "Where did you learn to do that?" Joel looked at her. He said, "Old buildings." He did not explain further. The host tried to restart the segment. Diana's communications director leaned in from off-camera and murmured something about the board chair call. Diana waved him back. She was still looking at Joel, and the question she had not meant to ask was still in the air between them, with no answer attached to it that she could use. The segment continued. The host asked Joel about his business. Joel answered. He did not embellish. He did not mention the debt note, or the 23 days, or the bank meeting. He mentioned Marin Electrical the way a person mentions something they built with their hands and intend to keep, factually, with the particular steadiness of someone who has decided not to negotiate with catastrophe in advance. Diana sat across from him for 4 more minutes. She was watching his hands. The segment ended. The mics came off. Joel was heading for the green room when Conrad Spear arrived. Spear was Diana's programming director and had been for 6 years, and he entered rooms the way he entered all conversations, already mid-thought, already certain, touching the left side of his collar with 2 fingers as he spoke. He did it when he was establishing something. He had done it, though Diana had never counted, approximately every time he told her something she later had to verify. He said, to the room generally but angled at Diana, the tradespiece, "We should cut it." Segment chemistry was off. 2 fingers, left collar, settled. He was fine. But fine isn't what we want on the morning block. Diana said, "I thought the chemistry was strong," Spear said. Not looking at Joel. The audience we're building doesn't connect with that profile. He said it with the smooth authority of someone who has learned that confident assertion is usually faster than evidence. Joel had stopped walking. He was standing near the green room door with his jacket in his hand. He said, without turning around, "You backdated the Linden syndication contract." The room recalibrated. Spear turned. He said, with the careful calm of someone who has been surprised before and knows how to handle it, "I'm sorry?" Joel turned. He said, "The Linden syndication deal." The license amendment was filed in September as though it had been executed in April. The gap matters because the April date puts it inside the exclusivity window your network was still under with the Hartwell Group. Filing it in September would have voided the deal. Filing it as April made it look clean. He was not reading from anything. He was stating facts in the same register he used to describe a cracked insulator. The Spear Media Holdings account received $2. $3 million in redirected ad revenue tied to that contract between April and December. The Sex Office of Market Intelligence has a classification for that pattern. It is not a favorable classification. Spear's fingers went to his collar. They did not find it. They stopped halfway. The filing, Joel said, is public record. The account is not, but the wire transfer origin codes on the quarterly report are. Someone who knew what they were looking for could find it in about 4 hours. His voice had not risen. He had not moved from where he was standing. Diana was very still. Spear said, in the quiet that precedes a storm, the false calm, the gathering, "You have no idea what you're talking about." Joel said, "Leave, one word. Flat. The way a door closes." Spear looked at Diana. Diana's face gave him nothing. He looked at the exit. He left without composing a parting line, without straightening his collar, without the mid-sentence arrival energy he'd come in with. He simply stopped. The 2 fingers never found their mark again. The green room was very quiet. Diana was aware that she could not speak, not because she had nothing to say, but because the space between what she had known this morning and what she now knew was so wide that crossing it in a single sentence felt impossible. She sat with the silence for a full paragraph of time. The hum of the building's ventilation. The far-off sound of a camera rig being repositioned on the stage. The specific quality of a room after something irrevocable has been said. Joel picked up his jacket again. He waited, because he was the kind of person who waits. She pulled the Linden contract herself at 2 that afternoon. Her general counsel confirmed what Joel had described in under 3 hours. The backdating was real. The Spear Media Holdings account was real. The $2.3 million was real. The SEC classification that applied was the one you did not want applied to your organization if you intended to keep your license. She called her general counsel. She called her board chair. She did not call Spear. At 4:30, she went to find Joel Marin, who was still in the building because Patel had asked him to walk the full Stage C conduit run while he was there, and Joel had agreed. Because a fault that age in infrastructure that age sometimes had siblings. She found him in the subbasement with Patel, standing in front of a panel of conduit that dated to a 1960s renovation and had never been fully replaced. The pipes were gray steel, rigid, bent by hand the way electrical conduit was bent before hydraulic benders were standard equipment, and they ran in long, clean, horizontal runs that were, for their age, still plumb. She told him what her counsel had confirmed. He nodded once. He did not say he had told her so. She said, "How did you know about Spear's account?" He said, "I didn't. I knew about the contract gap. I found the contract gap because I looked up Reese Media's SEC filings before I came in this morning. I was waiting in the green room for an hour. I read." He touched one of the old conduit runs with 2 fingers. The way a person touches something they recognize. The account was an inference. The timing and the amount made only one shape. She looked at the conduit. She said, "My father renovated this building in 1987. These runs were here before that." Joel said, "I know." She looked at him. He said, "My father was the field electrician on the 1987 renovation. He pulled the wire on this whole subbasement run. I have the original load path diagram in my toolbox." He said it without emphasis, without drama. The fact itself was doing all the work it needed to do. "He showed me this building when I was 11. He said it was the job he was proudest of because the owner cared whether it was done right." Diana's voice, when it came, was smaller than her boardroom voice. She said, "The owner was my father." Joel said, "Yes." She stood in the subbasement with the original conduit running overhead. Still true, still plumb, still carrying load after 37 years. And she understood that the things she had dismissed this morning had a history that went back further than she could see. and that the history was connected to her own in ways she had not been given the chance to know. She did not speak again for a long time. The ventilation system moved air through the old pipes. The bubble in a level, had anyone been holding one, would have sat perfectly still. Speer did not resign quietly. He filed a preemptive defamation action on the morning of day 20 and named Joel as the source of what he called malicious interference with a business relationship. The filing was strategic. It was designed to cost money and time and to force Joel into legal expenses he could not afford with 23 days left on a debt clock and a bank that was already watching. It named Meron Electrical's assets specifically. It was, as a move, precise and mean in the way of someone who has spent years learning which levers actually matter. Joel got the notification at 7:15. Calla was at the kitchen table with her level on the surface in front of her, watching the bubble. She was doing this the way she did it every morning, not measuring anything, just confirming that the table was still true. He read the notification. He put his phone in his pocket. His hands were still on the counter for 12 seconds. Then, he called Diana. She arrived at his shop at 9. She had been up since 5. Her general counsel was already on the phone with the sex enforcement intake line when she walked through Joel's shop door. She had spent the night going through Speer's personnel files, his expense history, and the Speer Media Holdings corporate registration, which traced to a Delaware shell that had been set up 11 months before Speer joined Reese Media, meaning the architecture for the redirect had been built before he took the job. That was not a man who had made a mistake. That was a man who had arrived with a plan. She had also, the night before, instructed her estate attorney to locate the shareholder registry for Reese Media Group. She had done this because of a sentence Joel had used when he described the 1987 renovation. Not the sentence itself, but something beneath it. The way he'd said my father was the field electrician, present tense in the past. The way you speak about someone who shaped a thing that is still standing. She had pulled the registry. She had found Meridian Grid Partners, LLC. She had found the 74% stake. She had pulled the Meridian Grid Partners corporate records. She had found the name on the registered agent filing, Robert P. Meron, estate trustee. She had found the date of trust transfer, 2019. She had found the beneficiary, Joel Robert Meron. She had sat with that for a long time before she called her estate attorney back. Joel's shop was in the middle of the third bay when she arrived. He was fitting a conduit brace on a new commercial run, the kind of precise, unhurried work that does not stop for interruptions. She said, "I need to tell you something." He set the brace down. He turned. He waited. She told him about the registry. She told him about Meridian Grid Partners. She told him the percentage. She told him what it meant, that his father, through the Northeast Grid Authority infrastructure spinoff that her own father's foundation had seeded in 1994, had become a founding shareholder of what became Reese Media Group, and that the stake had never been sold, never been dissolved, never been voted, never been used, and had passed to Joel 7 years ago through an estate that Joel had processed and filed and apparently never fully inventoried, and that Joel Robert Meron, electrician, had been the majority shareholder of Reese Media Group for 7 years without knowing it. She said all of this in declarative sentences, one after another, the way you say things when you have already processed the shock yourself and now need to give it to someone else. Joel listened. He did not move. She said, "Your father helped build this company, and my father's foundation funded the entity that made that possible. They were building the same thing from 2 different directions, and neither of us knew." Joel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My dad used to say the current always finds a path." He picked up the conduit brace. He looked at it. He put it down again. He would have thought that was funny. The second enforcement team had been building its case on the Spear data since 6 that morning. At 11:42, 2 federal investigators arrived at Reese Media's legal address and served a document examination notice on the programming division's files. Spear's attorney called Diana's general counsel at noon to explore a settlement framework. Diana's general counsel said there was nothing to settle and ended the call. At 2 p.m., Spear's defamation action against Joel was withdrawn. The withdrawal notice cited a conflict of interest in Spear's own legal team. The same attorney who had filed the action had also filed the Spear Media Holdings Incorporation and could not represent both. It was the kind of thing that looks like coincidence if you don't know that Diana's general counsel had spent the morning making sure the right people had the right documentation about the right attorney's dual role. At 3:15, Spear's employment was terminated by the Reese Media Board. The vote was unanimous. He exited the building with a security escort and did not say anything in the lobby or in the elevator or in the parking structure. He had run out of things to say that the situation would support. Joel was in the second bay of his shop at 3:40 when Diana called. She told him the seizure clock on Marin Electrical was moot as majority shareholder. He had the standing to resolve the subcontractor dispute that had triggered the debt note through a vendor reconciliation process that the Reese Media legal team could administer in under a week. The $187,000 note would be cleared against a legitimate facilities contract. Everything would be documented. Nothing would be owed. Joel said, "You don't have to do that," she said. "Your father wired this building. My father's foundation funded the stake that's kept my company running for 30 years. This is not a favor. This is what the current was always going to do." She said it quietly, like something she'd been thinking for a while and was only now saying out loud. He was holding the phone. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Calla gets out at 3:30. She said, "I know. Go." 1 year later, Calla was 10. She had started, that fall, sitting in on the electrical apprentice sessions Joel ran on Saturday mornings in the third bay, not because he'd asked her to, but because she had shown up one Saturday with her level and her school notebook and sat in the back and taken notes that were more organized than any of the apprentices. The apprentices had, by November, started asking her questions. Joel had stopped trying to redirect this and started printing her a copy of the day's circuit diagram. The debt notice was gone from the wall of the shop office. In its place was a framed copy of the 1987 load path diagram, the one from Joel's toolbox. The one his father had drawn the tolerances on while Joel wrote them down. Diana had found a framing shop that worked with architectural documents. She had not asked permission. She had just sent it over, and when Joel called to ask about it, she had said, "It belongs on the wall." Joel's business had 3 vans now, the same calluses, the same methodical care, less weight in his face than there had been the November before, and a specific thing in his chest where the 23-day number used to be. Not warmth exactly, but the absence of cold, which is its own kind of warmth. Diana had curtains in her office. Her mother had a good week in October, 3 days where Elaine had known her name, and Diana had sat with her for hours each day and not answered a single email. Her assistant had flagged 17 urgent items when she returned. Diana had looked at the list and told her assistant that anything that couldn't wait 3 days probably wasn't actually urgent. On a Saturday in December, she drove to Harwick and parked outside Marin Electrical, and Calla opened the bay door before she reached it. She always heard the car, and said, without preamble, "Dad's on the substation diagram. He said you'd want to see it. It's the new run for the Crescent building." She led Diana to the workbench. Joel had the diagram spread flat, held at the corners by a coffee mug and a conduit bender. He looked up when Diana came in. He had placed his grandfather's level on the table while he worked. It was there at the edge of the diagram, worn brass, perfect bubble. Diana stood beside him and looked at the diagram. Her hand was near his hand at the table's edge, both of them looking at the same document, neither of them moving away. Some things take a long time to find their path. Some currents run underground for years, carrying charge that nobody has measured, waiting for the right moment to complete the circuit. And when they do, the light that comes on is not surprising. It is simply the thing that was always supposed to happen, finally given the chance. Share this with someone who has ever been dismissed before they were understood. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And leave us this in the comments. If you had spent years being overlooked by the very company your family helped build, would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have walked back in and made them see what was always there? We read every one.